The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast metal bowl with seats rising up on all sides. 47 different alien species sat in their special chairs, each one made to fit their strange bodies. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had 6 legs or no legs at all. Some breathed gas while others needed water to live. But they all had one thing in common today. They all wanted humanity gone. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the hall on a small raised platform. His brown hair was turning gray at the sides, and his face showed the tiredness of a man who had been fighting a losing battle for months. He wore his best diplomatic uniform, dark blue with silver buttons, but it felt heavy on his shoulders now. Around him, the alien voices buzzed and clicked and hummed in languages that his translator could barely understand. The High Arbiter of the Zephyrians looked like a walking crystal, tall and thin with light glowing inside its clear body. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once, making the air itself vibrate. Its voice was cold and final, like a judge reading a death sentence. "The species called humans has been found guilty," the crystal being announced. "Guilty of too much fighting, guilty of taking too much space, guilty of not following the peace rules that all good species must follow." Jake felt his heart sink but kept his face calm. He had expected this but hoped against hope that reason might win. Behind him in the watching area, he could see Captain Lisa Rodriguez of Earth's defense ships. Her dark eyes were angry, but she sat still, knowing that any outburst would only make things worse. The Arbiter continued speaking, and each word hit Jake like a physical blow. "The punishment is exile. All humans must leave Council space immediately. You have 72 hours to gather your people and go to the Outer Rim, where you will stay forever." A sound like approval came from the alien audience. The Murkai delegate waved its purple tentacles in what Jake knew was their version of clapping. The insect-like creatures from the hive made clicking sounds with their mandibles. Even the gas cloud beings called ethereals pulsed with brighter colors to show they were pleased. Jake stepped forward, his boots making a small sound on the metal floor that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. "What about our colonies? What about the millions of families who have lived in Council space for generations? What about our trade agreements and our research partnerships?" Chancellor Vexhar of the Dominion Fleet stood up from his seat. He looked like a large lizard walking on 2 legs, with scales that shifted color when he was angry. Right now they were deep red. "Not our problem, human. Your species learned nothing from smaller punishments. You kept expanding, kept building weapons, kept questioning our authority." "We followed every law," Jake said, his voice getting louder despite himself. "We paid every tax, we honored every treaty." "But you never learned your place," hissed another voice. This came from Ambassador Crix of the Serpent Worlds, a creature that looked like a giant snake with arms. "You think you are equal to species that have ruled the galaxy for millions of years. You think your short lives and quick thoughts make you special?" The Crystal Arbiter raised one thin arm and the hall became quiet again. "The decision is final. Any human ship found in Council space after the deadline will be destroyed. Any human colony that refuses to leave will be burned from orbit. Any human who tries to hide among our worlds will be hunted down and eliminated." Jake looked around. The hall had faces that showed no mercy. Some looked bored, as if this was just routine business. Others seemed happy, like they were finally getting rid of something unpleasant. A few appeared worried, but not about humanity's fate. They were probably thinking about how to divide up human territory among themselves. "You make a mistake," Jake said quietly, but his words carried clearly in the huge space. "You think exile will weaken us. You think isolation will break our spirit. You think we will fade away in the darkness and never trouble you again." Vexhar's scales shifted to an amused yellow-green. "What else could happen? You have no allies now, no safe ports, no supply lines. The Outer Rim is empty space with dead worlds and hostile radiation. Your people will spend their remaining years struggling just to survive." Jake smiled then, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile a predator might show right before it struck. Several of the aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats without knowing why. You speak of things you do not understand. Humans have always done their best work when everything seemed hopeless. We crossed oceans in wooden boats. We flew to other worlds in metal tubes. We turned dead rocks into garden worlds. Each time, someone said it was impossible. The Arbiter's light pulsed with irritation. Empty words. Your time for speeches is over. Accept your fate with whatever dignity your species possesses. Oh, we accept it, Jake said, and his smile grew wider. We accept it completely. And someday, when your children ask why the galaxy changed so much, you can tell them it started here with this decision, made by beings too comfortable in their power to see the storm they were creating. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back one more time. 72 hours, you said? That should be enough time to begin. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving the alien representatives to celebrate their victory. They talked among themselves about dividing human worlds, about the increased trade profits, about the return of proper order to the galaxy. None of them noticed the small recording devices that had been placed around the chamber, or the coded signals being transmitted to ships waiting in the darkness between stars. In the observation deck, Lisa Rodriguez stood up slowly. Her hand moved to her communication device and she sent a single message to Earth and all human colonies. It contained just 2 words, but they would change everything. Phase 1. As the aliens continued their celebration, humanity began to disappear from known space, but they were not running away in fear and panic as their enemies expected. They were following a plan that had been prepared for this exact moment, a plan that would transform exile from punishment into opportunity, and turn the galaxy's greatest mistake into humanity's greatest triumph. The evacuation began immediately across all human worlds and stations. Ships of every size and shape moved through space like a great migration, carrying millions of people away from homes they had known for generations. But this was not the panicked flight that the aliens expected to see. Every movement was planned, every ship had a destination, every family knew exactly where they were going and what they would do when they got there. Admiral Tony Blake stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the streams of data flowing across his screens. The massive warship was the largest vessel humanity had ever built, stretching over 2 kilometers from nose to tail and bristling with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency, coordinating the biggest military operation in human history. Status report, Blake said to his communications officer. A young woman named Kate Sullivan, whose fingers danced over her controls like a pianist playing a complex song. All evacuation fleets are on schedule, sir. Colony ships from the Centauri system will reach the first waypoint in 6 hours. Mars' industrial fleet is ahead of schedule and already moving toward the rendezvous point. Earth's government vessels left orbit 20 minutes ago with the last of the diplomatic staff. Blake nodded and turned to his tactical display. Red dots showed human ships moving away from Council space, while blue dots marked alien patrol vessels watching them go. The aliens thought they were seeing defeat and retreat. They had no idea they were witnessing the opening moves of a war that had been planned for decades on Mars. Engineer Craig Thompson supervised the dismantling of the great terraforming stations that had turned the red planet into a garden world. His teams worked around the clock, taking apart machines the size of city blocks and loading them onto transport ships. Every bolt, every wire, every computer chip was precious now. Where they were going, they would need to build everything from scratch. Careful with that atmospheric processor, Craig called to a work crew struggling with a massive piece of equipment. We might not be able to build another one for years. His assistant, a red-headed woman named Amy Chun, looked up from her datapad. The aliens are going to be angry when they see what we're taking. They probably expected us to leave all the infrastructure behind for them to use. Craig laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Let them be angry. By the time they figure out how to operate our equipment, it won't matter anymore. We'll be so far ahead of them they'll never catch up. Dr. Rebecca Hayes worked frantically. In her laboratory, downloading centuries of human research into quantum storage devices the size of briefcases. Each one could hold the equivalent of 1,000,000 books, containing everything from basic science to advanced weapons technology. Her team of scientists moved like people possessed, knowing that the knowledge they saved now might mean the difference between extinction and survival. "How much more time do we need?" asked her chief assistant, a nervous young man named Gary Mitchell, who kept checking his watch every few minutes. 12 more hours for the critical files," Rebecca replied without looking up from her work. "But we'll keep loading data until the last possible moment. Every piece of information could be vital." In the deeper parts of space, far from alien sensors, other preparations were taking place. Hidden shipyards that had been built in secret over many years were finally revealing their purpose. Massive construction facilities floated in the darkness between stars, surrounded by asteroid mines and fusion reactors that provided endless power. These facilities had been disguised as simple mining operations or research stations, but their true function was far more important. Captain Nick Foster commanded one of these hidden bases from his office deep inside an artificial asteroid. On his screens, he could see the production lines working at full capacity, building ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These vessels incorporated technologies that humanity had developed in secret, advances that the aliens knew nothing about. "How many ships will be ready for Phase 2? Nick asked his production chief, a grizzled veteran named Sam Parker, who had been building spacecraft for 30 years. 250 completed, with another 100 finishing construction. "Over the next month," Sam reported. "Each one is equipped with the new stealth systems and the improved weapons. The aliens won't even see them coming," Nick smiled grimly. The aliens thought they were getting rid of a dangerous neighbor. They had no idea they were creating a monster that would return to haunt them. "Continue production at maximum rate. We'll need every ship we can get for what's coming." On Earth, President Helen Carter addressed the planet for the last time from the Oval Office. Her words were broadcast to every human world and ship, carried by quantum communicators that the aliens could not intercept or decode. She spoke simply and clearly, knowing that history would remember this moment. "My fellow humans, today we begin a journey that will test everything we are and everything we can become. We are leaving not because we are weak, but because we choose. To leave, we go into exile not as refugees, but as explorers preparing for a greater destiny. The galaxy has decided it does not want us among them. They will learn to regret that decision." As the last human transport left Earth's solar system, alien celebration began on dozens of worlds. The Zephyrians calculated how much additional trade they could conduct without human competition. The Morkai began planning which former human colonies they would claim for their own empire. The insect races of the Hive Collective saw opportunities to expand their breeding grounds into previously forbidden territory, but in the darkness beyond their sensors, humanity was already changing. The exile had freed them from treaties that had limited their research, from agreements that had restricted their expansion, from diplomatic necessities that had held back their true potential. Now they could develop weapons without worrying about arms control treaties. They could expand without asking permission. They could become what they had always been meant to be. Admiral Blake received reports from across human space as the evacuation neared completion. Every ship was accounted for, every person was safe, every piece of vital equipment had been saved or destroyed to prevent alien use. The operation had gone more smoothly than anyone had dared hope. "Send the final message to all fleet commanders," Blake ordered. "Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2 immediately." Across the galaxy, sleeper agents who had lived among alien populations for years began to activate. Hidden sensors placed in key locations started transmitting data about military movements, political decisions, and economic plans, humanity's intelligence network built over decades of patient work came alive just as their physical presence disappeared from known space. The aliens had exiled humanity without fear of consequence, believing their superior numbers and ancient wisdom would protect them. They celebrated their victory while their enemies gathered strength in the darkness, preparing weapons they could not imagine and making plans they could not comprehend. The exile was over, but the real war was just beginning, and humanity intended to fight it on their own terms in their own time, with advantages their enemies would never see coming until it was too late to matter. 3 years passed in what the aliens called the Great Peace. Trade routes that had been disrupted by human expansion were now flowing smoothly again. Territorial disputes that had involved human mediation were settled by force or simple conquest. The rigid social order that the elder species preferred had returned to the galaxy, with each race knowing its place and staying within proper boundaries. Chancellor Vexhar addressed the Galactic Council from the same podium where humanity's exile had been announced. His scales showed the deep blue color of satisfaction as he spoke to representatives from across known space. The great hall was full of alien dignitaries who had come to celebrate their continued prosperity. 3 years ago, we made a difficult but necessary decision, Vexhar announced, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. We removed a disruptive element from our civilized society. Today, I can report that this action has brought nothing but positive results. Trade is up 30% across all sectors. Military conflicts have decreased by half. Research projects are proceeding without the constant interference of human innovations that disrupted our careful planning. The assembled aliens responded, with their various forms of applause. Tentacles waved, mandibles clicked, and gas clouds pulsed with brighter colors. Even the most cautious species seemed pleased with how things had developed. The humans, they believed, were either dead or struggling to survive in the empty wastes beyond civilization. But strange reports had begun filtering in from the frontier regions, stories that the Council's leaders chose to ignore or explain away. Scout ships reported unusual energy readings from empty star systems. Mining operations in the outer asteroids found equipment that had been stripped away during the night with no sign of who had taken it or how. Research stations on remote worlds went silent without sending any distress signals. Captain Amy Chun of the Zephyrian Exploration Corps was investigating one such disappearance when she encountered something that should not have existed. Her small scout ship had been searching for a missing research team on a planet at the very edge of Council space. The world was supposed to be empty except for automated mining equipment, but her sensors were showing massive energy signatures from the night side. "This is Scout Ship Clarity reporting to Zephyrian Command," Amy transmitted, her crystalline voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting artificial structures on the surface of Mining World 447. Repeat. There are buildings here that are not on any of our charts." She brought her ship in for a closer look, using passive sensors to avoid detection. What she saw made her transparent body flicker with shock. A city covered the landscape below, but it was like no city any known species had ever built. The architecture was strange and functional, with towers that curved in impossible directions and streets laid out in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Command, I need immediate backup," Amy continued her transmission. "This installation is massive and appears to be fully operational. I'm detecting thousands of life signs but cannot identify the species. The technology readings are off all known scales." Before she could say more, her ship's alarms began screaming. Unknown vessels were rising from the planet's surface, moving faster than anything in her database. They were sleek and dark, like shadows given physical form, and they moved with a coordination that suggested advanced artificial intelligence. Unknown vessels, this is Zephyrian Scout Ship Clarity, Amy broadcast on all frequencies. Identify yourselves immediately. You're in violation of Council territorial boundaries. The response came from one of the approaching ships, and the voice that answered made Amy's crystalline heart freeze. It was human, speaking perfect Zephyrian with an accent she had heard before during the old days when humans still lived among them. "Scout Ship Clarity. This is Commander Danny Rodriguez of the Terran Reconnaissance Fleet. You have entered a restricted military zone. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed." Amy's last transmission was cut short by weapons fire that vaporized her ship in seconds. The strange vessels returned to their hidden city, leaving no trace that a Zephyrian scout had ever been there, but the damage was done. Other listening posts had intercepted fragments of the transmission, enough to raise questions that some aliens were beginning to ask. Dr. Elena Price studied the scattered reports in her laboratory on the Council homeworld. As the chief xenobiologist for the galactic government, she was responsible for tracking and categorizing unknown species that might pose a threat to civilization. The patterns she was seeing in the data made her nervous in ways she had not felt for decades. 17 research stations, 12 mining operations, 8 trade convoys, and 4 colony worlds, she muttered to herself, looking at the holographic display that showed incident locations across the galaxy. All disappeared without distress signals. All insectas adjacent to the outer rim, all within the past 6 months. Her assistant, a young Morkai named Crixtal, waved his purple tentacles in confusion. Could this be some unknown space phenomenon? Perhaps a natural disaster we have not encountered before? Elena shook her head, her long neck swaying with emotion. Natural disasters don't steal industrial equipment. Natural disasters don't relocate entire populations without leaving bodies behind. This is organized, systematic, and carried out by someone with advanced technology and detailed knowledge of our operations. The evidence was subtle but clear to someone trained to look for patterns. Whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of Council security procedures, communication protocols, and military patrol schedules. They struck only when they knew they would not be interrupted, and they took only what would be most useful for building an industrial base. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be testing Council response times and capabilities on the outer world of SciFiPrime. Admiral Tony Blake stood before a massive holographic display that showed the entire galaxy in 3 dimensions. Around him, the greatest military minds humanity had ever produced studied their enemies and planned their next moves. The hidden city that Amy Chun had discovered before her death was just one of hundreds that humanity had built during their exile. The probe missions have given us everything we need to know about their defensive capabilities, reported General Sam Parker, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a man whose plans were coming together perfectly. They've grown soft during our absence. Their patrol schedules are predictable, their responses are slow, and their technology has not advanced significantly. Blake nodded, his eyes never leaving the display where red markers showed human settlements and blue markers showed alien positions. 3 years of careful preparation had given humanity advantages their enemies could not imagine. While the aliens celebrated peace, humans had been building the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. What about their intelligence services? Blake asked his spy master, a thin woman named Carol Lee who had spent years infiltrating alien societies before the exile. Still compromised, Carol reported with a cold smile. Our sleeper agents remain in position throughout their governments, militaries, and scientific establishments. They have no idea how thoroughly we've penetrated their operations. When we begin Phase 3, they'll be blind and deaf to our true capabilities. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what was coming. 3 years of exile had transformed humanity from a minor galactic power into something far more dangerous. They had used their time in the darkness to evolve, to adapt, and to prepare for a war their enemies did not even know was coming. Begin. Final preparations, Blake ordered. Send activation codes to all cells. Start moving our assault fleets into position. The aliens wanted us gone from their galaxy, and we obliged them. Now they're going to learn what it means when humans come back angry. In the council chambers, the celebration continued as alien leaders congratulated themselves on their successful policy of exile. They had no way of knowing that human eyes were watching them from the shadows, that human ears were listening to their every word, and that human minds were counting down the days until their comfortable world would be turned upside down. The silence from the outer rim had been a gift, giving humanity time to become something their enemies feared to face but were too blind to see coming. The attack began at exactly 0800 Standard Galactic Time across 47 star systems simultaneously. The aliens would later call it the Day of Fire, when their comfortable universe exploded into violence so sudden and devastating that many thought it must be a natural disaster rather than warfare. Ships appeared from hyperspace using technology that bypassed every detection system the galaxy possessed, struck with weapons that turned battleships into expanding clouds of plasma, then vanished before reinforcements could even be called. Admiral Zixtar of the Dominion fleet was having his morning meal when the alarms began screaming throughout his flagship. The massive vessel shuddered as explosions bloomed around it, and through the viewing ports he could see his escort ships dying. One by one, the attackers moved like ghosts, there one moment and gone the next, leaving only wreckage to mark their passage. "Report!" Zixtar bellowed, his scales shifting to combat red as he rushed toward the bridge. Around him, his crew worked frantically at control stations while emergency lights bathed everything in hellish crimson. "Unknown vessels attacking from multiple vectors," his tactical officer reported, her voice tight with panic. "Ships of unknown design using weapons that penetrate. Our shields like they don't exist? We've lost 6 destroyers and 2 heavy cruisers in the first 5 minutes." Zixtar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The enemy ships were smaller than his own vessels but moved with impossible speed and coordination. Their weapons fired projectiles that traveled at significant fractions of light speed, turning his proud warships into debris before they could even attempt to return fire. "Identify the attackers," he ordered. "Use all scanning frequencies. I want to know who has the courage to challenge the Dominion fleet." The answer came over the communication channels, broadcast on frequencies that every ship could hear. The voice was human, speaking perfect Dominion with an accent that Zixtar remembered from the old days when humans had still been considered equals. "Dominion Fleet, this is Captain Gary Mitchell of the Terran Naval ship Retribution. You are probably wondering who we are and why we're destroying your ships. Allow me to remind you of a decision made 3 years ago in the council chambers. You exiled humanity without fear of consequence. We are those consequences." The human ship decloaked directly in front of Zixtar's flagship, close enough that he could see details of its construction through the viewing ports. It was beautiful and terrible, sleek like a predator but armored in metals that seemed to absorb light itself. Weapons that had no equivalent in alien technology lined its hull, and behind it came dozens more vessels of similar design. "This is impossible," Zixtar whispered, but even as he spoke the words his ship shook from another hit. "Humans don't have this technology. They were barely more advanced than primitives when we exiled them." Captain Mitchell's voice came over the speakers again, and this time there was something like laughter in his tone. 3 years is a long time, Admiral. Long enough to solve problems that limited us. Long enough to develop weapons your scientists said were impossible. Long enough to plan your destruction down to the smallest detail. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all, but a demonstration of overwhelming superiority. Human. Ships moved through the Dominion formation like sharks among minnows, their weapons cutting through armor and shields that had been considered invincible. When Zixtar's remaining ships tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by more human vessels that had appeared from nowhere. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as humanity revealed the true extent of their transformation. The Hive Collective's core worlds found their orbital defenses shattered by weapons that fired antimatter warheads. Ethereal gas giant habitats were invaded by soldiers in power armor who moved through toxic atmospheres like they were breathing normal air. Zephyrian crystal cities burned under plasma bombardment that turned their beautiful structures into pools of molten glass. In the council chambers, emergency sessions began as reports flooded in from across civilized space. High Arbiter Kethvos struggled to maintain order as representatives screamed accusations and demands for immediate military action. The great hall that had once been a place of calm deliberation now echoed with panic and rage. "How could this happen?" wailed the Morkai delegate, his tentacles writhing in distress. Our intelligence services reported no sign of human military buildup. Our border patrols detected no hostile preparations. Where did these ships come from? The answer came from Dr. Elena Price, who had been studying the attack patterns from her laboratory. Her voice was grim as she addressed the assembled aliens through the emergency communication system. "They've been building for 3 years in systems we thought were empty," she reported. "Using resources we didn't know existed, developing technologies we considered impossible. While we celebrated their exile, they were preparing to return. As something we could never have imagined." Chancellor Vexhar's scales had turned the deep black of despair as he watched casualty reports scroll across his screens. Entire fleets had been destroyed, major colonies had fallen, and strategic resources had been captured by an enemy that seemed to know everything about alien capabilities while revealing nothing about their own. "What are their demands?" he asked, through the communication link. "What do they want from us?" The answer came directly from the human fleet commanders, broadcast simultaneously to every government, military installation, and civilian population center in Council space. The voice belonged to Admiral Tony Blake, speaking from the bridge of his flagship, as it led the largest human battle fleet in known space toward the Council homeworld. "People of the galaxy, 3 years ago your leaders decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed among civilized species. They cast us out into the darkness, believing we would fade away and die forgotten. They were wrong." The transmission continued with footage of human fleets massing at the borders of Council space. Thousands of warships that dwarfed anything the aliens had ever built, carrying weapons that could crack planets and soldiers trained in warfare beyond alien understanding. "We did not fade away. We evolved. We became something your scientists said was impossible and your military leaders claimed could never exist. We are no longer the species you exiled. We are humanity perfected, and we have returned to collect payment for the insult you gave us." The aliens watched in horror as human ground forces landed on worlds they had thought impregnable. These soldiers moved like ghosts through defensive positions. Their weapons cut through armor like paper, and their tactics displayed a level of coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Cities that had stood for thousands of years fell in hours to enemies who fought with ruthless efficiency. On the former human colony world of New Terra, Colonel Danny Rodriguez led his assault troops through the capital city that had been renamed and resettled by Zephyrian colonists. The crystal beings who had taken over human homes and businesses now fled before soldiers, who moved through their city like avenging angels. "Secure the government district," Rodriguez ordered his platoon. "Leaders over the tactical network, take their officials alive for interrogation. Destroy all military installations but preserve civilian infrastructure. We're here to conquer, not to commit genocide." The Zephyrian governor, who had replaced the human administration, tried to surrender, offering his crystal crown as a symbol of submission. Rodriguez looked at the alien who had grown fat and comfortable in a house built by human hands on a world shaped by human labor. "Your surrender is noted but irrelevant," Rodriguez told him through a translator. "You will serve as governor under human authority, administering this world for its new owners. Fail in your duties, and you will be replaced by someone more competent." Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated as human forces reclaimed worlds that had been taken from them and conquered others that had never known human rule. The aliens who had celebrated humanity's exile now faced the reality of human occupation, and they learned that the species they had dismissed as primitive and violent had become something far more sophisticated in their capacity for organized warfare. The Council's attempts to organize resistance failed as their fleets were systematically destroyed and their communications networks were infiltrated by human intelligence operatives. The sleeper agents who had remained hidden for years now activated, providing targeting information and sabotaging defensive preparations from within. As the human fleet approached the Council homeworld, Blake sent his final ultimatum to the alien governments. His words were simple and left no room for negotiation. "Surrender unconditionally, and your species will be permitted to survive under human governance. Continue to resist, and we will demonstrate why evolution favors the adaptable. Over the comfortable, you have 12 hours to decide. The surrender came before the deadline expired. One by one, the alien governments that had voted for humanity's exile transmitted their unconditional capitulation to Admiral Blake's fleet. The great warships that had once protected their worlds now drifted powerless in space, their crews evacuated and their weapon systems disabled by human boarding parties. The age of alien dominance was over, ended not by negotiation or gradual change, but by the overwhelming application of military force. President Helen Carter stood in the same chamber where humanity's exile had been pronounced 3 years earlier. The great hall looked smaller now, somehow diminished by the presence of human soldiers standing guard at every entrance. The alien representatives who had once sat in judgment over her species now occupied simple chairs on the main floor. Their ornate thrones removed and stored away like relics of a forgotten age. "You feared our expansion," Helen said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems to every corner of the chamber. "You worried about our refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. You decided that the solution was to cast us out beyond the borders of civilization, believing that exile would either destroy us or teach us proper humility." Behind her stood the flags of the new Terran hegemony, representing territories that now stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Each flag bore the names of worlds that had fallen to human forces during the 6-month campaign that the aliens would remember as the War of Return. The speed and completeness of their defeat still shocked leaders who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Chancellor Vexhar sat in the front row of former council members, his scales showing the dull gray color of defeat. The proud Dominion warrior, who had once dismissed humanity as primitives, now wore the simple robes of a planetary administrator under human authority. His empire had been divided among human colonies, his fleets had been captured or destroyed, and his people now worked to support the very species they had tried to eliminate. "What you failed to understand," Helen continued, "is that humanity has always done its best work when facing impossible odds. You gave us exactly what we needed: time to develop without interference, motivation to exceed our previous limitations, and the moral justification to reshape this galaxy according to human vision." Admiral Blake stepped forward to address the assembled aliens. His uniform bore decorations from battles that had lasted mere hours but changed the fate of entire star systems. Around him stood the other military leaders who had planned and executed humanity's return, men and women who had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. "During our exile, we didn't simply survive in the darkness beyond your borders," Blake explained to the watching crowds. "We thrived. We built industrial complexes in rogue star systems that dwarf anything you constructed during centuries of peace. We developed technologies that your scientists claimed were theoretically impossible. We created a military force capable of conquering the galaxy because we knew we would eventually need exactly that capability." Dr. Rebecca Hayes took her turn at the podium, displaying holographic images of the scientific advances humanity had achieved during their exile. New materials that could withstand the heat of stellar cores, propulsion systems that could fold space itself, weapons that manipulated the fundamental forces of physics, innovations that had taken human technology centuries beyond what their enemies possessed. "The exile freed us from research restrictions that had limited our potential," she told the alien audience. "We no longer needed to worry about arms control treaties or ethical oversight committees. We could pursue pure scientific advancement without political interference." The result was 3 years of progress that would normally have taken 3 centuries. Governor Craig Thompson, now administrator of the former Zephyrian home system, met with the surviving leadership of his new subjects in what had once been their parliament building. The crystal beings who had voted for humanity's exile now sought his permission for basic governmental functions. Their proud civilization had been reduced to a client state existing only at human sufferance. "Your predecessors made a choice 3 years ago," Craig told them, his voice echoing in the great crystal chamber. "They decided that humanity was a problem to be eliminated rather than partners to be engaged. Now you live with the consequences." of that decision, and your children will inherit a world where humans make the important choices while you handle the daily administration. The Zephyrian Council members flickered with dim light, their crystalline bodies showing the stress of their reduced circumstances. Once they had ruled over dozens of star systems with absolute authority. Now they administered a single world. Under human oversight, their every decision subject to approval by aliens they had once considered inferior. "What of our culture?" asked the eldest council member, his voice trembling through the translator. "What of our traditions and our way of life?" Craig considered the question for a moment before answering. "Your culture will survive as long as it doesn't conflict with human interests. Your traditions can continue if they serve the greater good of the hegemony. But understand this clearly, you are no longer an independent species making your own destiny. You are subjects of humanity now, and subjects who prove their value will be treated well." On Earth, now the capital of a galactic empire, children learned about the exile in their history classes. They studied the speeches of alien leaders who had dismissed humanity as a temporary annoyance. They watched recordings of the council session where their species had been cast out into the darkness. Most importantly, they learned how their parents and grandparents had turned apparent defeat into ultimate victory. "Never forget," their teachers told them, "that our enemies made the mistake of underestimating human determination. They thought exile would weaken us, but it made us stronger. They believed isolation would break our spirit, but it freed us to become what we were always meant to be." The new generation of humans grew up knowing they were the inheritors of a galaxy-spanning civilization built by people who had refused to accept defeat. They learned to pilot ships that could cross the galaxy in days, to operate weapons that could shatter moons, and to govern alien populations with the firm hand of absolute authority. Commander Nick Foster, now Supreme Governor of the former Markai Empire, addressed a gathering of human colonial administrators in what had once been the aliens' capital city. The purple-tentacled beings who had celebrated humanity's exile now worked in the fields and factories that supported human expansion, their grand cities serving as administrative centers for their new masters. "Remember that we are not conquerors. In the traditional sense," Nick told his audience of governors and military commanders. "We are the inevitable result of a galaxy that tried to solve its problems by pushing them away instead of dealing with them directly. The aliens created us through their own actions, and now they must live with what they created." The human administrators nodded in understanding. They had been trained not just in military tactics and colonial management, but in the philosophy of human supremacy that justified their rule over alien populations. They understood that their authority came not from conquest alone, but from the superior vision and determination that had enabled humanity to survive exile and return stronger than ever. Trade flowed through the galaxy under human direction, with alien worlds providing raw materials and basic, manufactured goods while human colonies produced the advanced technologies that kept civilization running. The rigid social hierarchy that the elder species had preferred was still in place. But now humans occupied the top positions while their former judges served as middle managers and manual laborers. Scientific research proceeded under human guidance, with alien scientists contributing their knowledge to projects designed by human leaders. The discoveries that emerged from this collaboration advanced human understanding of the universe while ensuring that no alien species could develop technologies that might threaten human dominance. President Carter concluded her address to the former council with words that would be remembered for generations. "You sought to exile humanity without fear of consequence because you believed your ancient wisdom and superior numbers would protect you from any retaliation we might attempt. You learned too late that consequences, like humans, have a way of returning when least expected." She gestured toward the viewing ports where human warships could be seen patrolling the space around the former council homeworld. "This galaxy tried to reject us, but we refused to be rejected. It tried to limit us, but we broke those limitations. It tried to diminish us, but we became greater than anyone imagined possible." The alien representatives sat in silence, understanding that their comfortable age of dominance was over forever. Their descendants would grow up in a universe where humanity made the rules, where human interests came first, and where the price of challenging human authority was swift and decisive. Destruction. As the ceremony concluded and the former council members were escorted to their new quarters, the human leadership began planning the next phase of expansion. The galaxy they had conquered was vast, but beyond its borders lay other galaxies, other civilizations, other challenges that would test human adaptability and determination.